flow. When somebody says your sentences need to flow more, what do they mean? Well, they usually mean parallel structure, correct placement of modifiers, and avoiding fragments. So we're going to go through all of those things, and then we're going to do some practice. All right, what is flow? Writers and English teachers use the term flow to describe sentences that seem to run smoothly, with no unexpected breaks or grammatical oddities or awkward uses of the English language. The idea that a sentence flows means that you read through it and your eyes just slide right through it to the end, and you get the meaning and you don't stop to look at how the sentence is put together or why did they say that, or there's nothing to pull you out. It's like water flowing through a stream. It looks like one continuous thing from a distance. Now, flow is largely a matter of practice, but there are several key elements that you must get right, absolutely must, in order to achieve it. If you want your sentences to flow, there are some pitfalls you absolutely have to avoid. Here they are, and here's how to avoid them. All right, the first thing you need to know about is parallel structure. English loves parallelism because we have such a large vocabulary in this language, such a large lexicon, and so many different ways to say things. We like it, perversely, when things line up and they're kind of similar and the same. It helps us remember what's been said. So we love sentences with parallel structure. If you can possibly phrase items on a list or similar ideas within a collection in a similar grammatical form, do so. Basically, the idea is if you've got a whole bunch of things that are all in a category together, try to say them in approximately the same way. So, here's a sentence that's not parallel. Please go to the store and buy milk, eggs, and a loaf of bread. Okay, it's not a bad sentence. There's nothing wrong with it except that your brain is going milk, eggs, and a loaf of bread. And you stumble all over it, and you sit there going, wait, there's something not quite right about that sentence. Well, I'll tell you what's not quite right about that sentence. It's that you've got a loaf of bread when everything else is just milk and eggs. Short, short, long and clunky. So what you do is you make it parallel, and there are two ways to do it. You could just say, please go to the store and buy milk, eggs, and bread. Nice, smooth list. Very parallel. It's also parallel to say, please go to the store and buy a gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, and a loaf of bread. Either of those will work just beautifully. The important thing is to be consistent, to be parallel. Let's look at another example. It's not parallel to say, good writing includes good spelling, grammar, and punctuating. Why is this wrong? Well, quite simply because if you are talking about the concepts, okay, you're using them like nouns. Spelling, even though it ends with ing, is also a name for an academic subject and the practice of spelling words correctly. It's a gerund, which is a verb ending in ing, that gets used like a noun, okay? Grammar is a noun. Punctuating, unfortunately, is not a gerund. If we want to talk about the practice of using punctuation marks correctly, we say punctuation. So what we did in this sentence is we went thing that acts like a noun, thing that is a noun, thing that's definitely not a noun. Well, now we're all confused and dissatisfied and unhappy. So let's make it parallel so that all of your English listeners can go, oh, that's nice, yay, and on we go. It's parallel to say, good writing includes good spelling, grammar, and punctuation. It flows nicely from beginning to end, and nobody gets any nasty surprises. All right, modifiers. What is a modifier to begin with? A modifier is any word or phrase that modifies another word or phrase. It's a word or group of words that does the job of an adjective or an adverb, for example. Adjectives are a type of modifier that modifies nouns and pronouns. Entire phrases can modify subjects. Now here's what you need to know about modifiers. Modifiers should be placed as close as possible to the words they modify. If you start a sentence with an action, for example, follow it up immediately with the actor. Here's the wrong way to do it. While strolling through the park, a mad squirrel attacked her. Okay, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a mad squirrel stroll anywhere. I've seen mad squirrels, I've seen them charge, I've seen them snarl, I've never seen them stroll. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen a squirrel of any description stroll. Chances are the person who was doing the strolling is the person who was attacked, a human being. So let's see if we can make this a bit better. While strolling through the park, she was attacked by a mad squirrel. Okay, now we've got the person who did the strolling right next to the strolling. We've got she right next to while strolling through the park. That's great. We can also say she was attacked by a mad squirrel while strolling through the park. Once again, she was attacked by a mad squirrel while strolling through the park. Okay, we've got verb phrase, but still while strolling through the park goes back to she. All right, more about modifiers. Whatever the modifier is, place it as close as possible to whatever it modifies. Otherwise, your reader may become confused. For example, I have some sandwiches Betty made in my lunchbox. Okay, did Betty actually construct the sandwiches within the confines of the lunchbox? No, but the way this sentence is set up is it sounds like, I have some sandwiches that Betty made in my lunchbox. Betty climbed into my lunchbox and made me some sandwiches, and now I have them. No, what you probably actually mean to say is that in your lunchbox there are sandwiches, and those sandwiches have been lovingly prepared by Betty, whoever Betty is. So here's the right way to say it. In my lunchbox, I have some sandwiches that Betty made. So that Betty made now modifies sandwiches, and in my lunchbox modifies I have, not Betty made. Betty made. In my lunchbox is a modifier phrase that's acting like an adverb, and it's modifying the verb have. Where do you have? You have in your lunchbox. That Betty made is acting like an adjective, modifying sandwiches. What kind of sandwiches? Sandwiches that Betty made. So we put that Betty made next to sandwiches, and we put in my lunchbox next to have. And now nobody is wondering how Betty climbed into your lunchbox in order to construct a sandwich. All right, now we look at fragments. What is a fragment? A sentence fragment is either a phrase, which is a group of words that lacks either a subject or a verb or both, or a weak clause, a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, but can't stand on its own for whatever reason, sometimes called a dependent clause. So here's a fragment. After the opera began. Okay, that's a weak clause. It's a dependent clause. We've got a subject and a verb, opera and began, but if you walked up to someone on a subway platform and said, after the opera began, they'd look at you like you were crazy. Whereas if you walk up to them on a subway platform and say, after the opera began, Eric fell asleep, they may still look at you like you're crazy, but they'll at least understand what you said. So whenever you're using dependent clauses, make sure that there's an independent clause, a strong clause, also in the sentence for all those extra phrases and clauses to hang on to. Make sure that you've got Eric fell asleep if you're going to say after the opera began. I realize that in spoken English you can answer a question with a fragment. Where did you leave the keys? On the table. That's fine, but don't use it in your writing. It's considered very unprofessional and it marks you as being somewhat ill-educated. All right. Now let's take everything we've learned and put it into practice. Rewrite each one of these sentences to make it flow. Now there may be several options. If at all possible, choose the best one. Here are the sentences. Oliver enjoys drawing, painting, and creating sculptures. On a dark and stormy night. While reading a book, a bird outside the window caught his attention. Before the sun rose. Making a movie requires actors, writers, producers, editors, and somebody to direct them. And my personal favorite, Mrs. White's husband threatened to kill her in public. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. You ready? Here we go. All right. Oliver enjoys drawing, painting, and sculpting. In this case, we had a list of 3 things, and one of them didn't match the others. We didn't want making sculptures because it's longer and clunkier than just sculpting. So we've got drawing, painting, and sculpting. Now it's parallel. Now, our next problem was we had a fragment. So, on a dark and stormy night, lightning struck the house. You could add just about any independent clause here to make the sentence work. The point is that you added an independent, a strong clause. Next, a bird outside the window caught his attention while he was reading a book. All right, the problem with the original sentence is it made it sound like the bird was the one doing the book reading. Birds, as far as I know, do not read books, although, of course, if you do know a bird that reads books, please get back to me. I'd like to meet this bird. But we'll assume that this is a normal bird that does not read books, so chances are it was he, the owner of the attention, who was reading the book when the bird caught that attention. So we rewrite the sentence, a bird outside the window caught his attention while he was reading a book. While he was reading a book is an adverbial phrase modifying the verb caught. When did it catch? While he was reading a book. So now we've put while he was reading a book as close as possible to the predicate caught his attention. Next, we had another list of things, and it ended in a big clunky phrase that we kind of stumbled over at the end of the sentence. Here's how we fixed it. Making a movie requires actors, writers, producers, editors, and a director. I realize it's not strictly parallel to say a director rather than directors, but if you're making only one movie, you probably have only one director. If you have more than one director, what you have is not a movie, it is an argument. Next, this is my favorite example of a misplaced modifier. It's actually from the movie Clue. And at one point, Mrs. White, who is a widow, is describing her husband and says he was crazy. He threatened to kill me in public. The immediate response from somebody else standing in the room is, why would he want to kill you in public? Because, of course, if you put in public next to kill her, that implies that it's the killing that takes place in public. But chances are it's actually the threatening that took place in public. People are more likely to make threats in public than they are to kill somebody in public. So, if you want to rewrite that sentence to make it make more sense, you could say, Mrs. White's husband threatened in public to kill her. So we've got the adverbial phrase in public. It's a prepositional phrase that's acting like an adverb, and we've put it right next to the verb threatened. Or we could say, in public, Mrs. White's husband threatened to kill her. Now, in public is modifying Mrs. White's husband and telling you where he was when he did the threatening. So once again, it's the threatening, not the killing, that's taking place in public, and the sentence makes a lot more sense. Of course, if you hadn't had that misplaced modifier, you would have missed a really funny gag from the original movie, but we can't have everything. And that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com.